Okay, well, Brionté, I am so grateful you could join us for this Earth Day chat. We're really excited to get to know you and hear your thoughts. So to start out, in addition to being the director for the Georgia Conservation Voters, you're also an advocate for a greener Georgia in general. And within all of that, could you talk a little bit about what role social media marketing plays in your advocacy work?
Social media marketing has always been really important to my work in the climate and environmental justice space. When I started in the career field, I was working for the Atlanta Regional Commission, and I wasn't in a department that had a lot of communications infrastructure. We were trying to get the word out about fogs, right? Fats, oils, and greases, going down people's drinks, drains, and kitchen sinks. And they wanted to do this awareness campaign. And I found it really challenging. I thought at the time, it's because I was really inexperienced. But what I learned later was because there was no real communications infrastructure for that particular program at that organization. And so, you can email things to people all day. Our method was to try to reach teachers and to send it out through schools. But it wasn't a robust effort. So I'm like, how do we get the word out about something that's important? And that was like the first, exercise I had. And so then from there, I took on roles that were more organizing focused. They were more focused on being in community and being with people, rather than, sort of being behind a computer. There's a time and place for being behind a computer, but these jobs were more focused on being out and about. And, I was at the time coming up in the social media era, right? Like I'm the generation where social media was normalized as a thing that people did. I mean, all the way back to like MySpace, and then Facebook became the thing, and then Twitter and all the stuff started really coming out as I was, in high school and beyond, right? As things that we were gonna want to engage with to reach people, because social media at the time was so new and so fresh. Everybody, was engaging with it, and there was a lot of really cool ways to share information, to experiment with sharing information. In those early days, we learned what worked, we learned what didn't work, right? And we've taken that and honed it into like now social media marketing is really, really critical. And it's a science almost, right? There's a lot of skill that goes behind making sure you're reaching the right people. And so that was a ramble just to say that, like, from the beginning of my time in this field, communications is really important. And then social media just being something that has grown and developed as I've grown and developed, as a human being and as a professional in the environmental space.
Yeah. And I like what you brought up about social media and just marketing, and that there is a skill and a science, and you could even call it a really thought out strategy behind it. And I feel like every Earth Day, we see more and more brands coming out with their sustainability strategy and marketing how they're going green. And in some instances, that is greenwashing. And with the vast amounts of social media that's out there, it can be hard to identify greenwashing. What strategies would you recommend to kind of spot those brands that may be faking sustainability, or at least pretending to be green in an effort to get more customers? And why do you think greenwashing is a detriment to the environmental movement as a whole?
Yeah, so I appreciate you for digging into this darker side of social media marketing. I was like, it's important. Why is it important? Because it's effective, right? It's effective at driving people to take action on things or to believe things, right? And you can tell how effective it is when you're scrolling through your social media feed and you're trying really hard to resist buying this thing that they've been advertising to you, because that's how specific it's gotten and how effective it's gotten at anticipating who you are and what information you might like to see, and what information you need to see to react a certain way and to do a certain thing. And so, of course, if we figured that out as advocates and activists, businesses figured that out. Primarily, initially, it was to sell you things, but now it's to sell you ideas. And so that's where it's gotten really dangerous. And companies are absolutely playing this game of putting out information that makes them look like they are being responsive to climate change and environmental concerns. And they're doing that because they know that there is a growing number of people who are vocal about being concerned about environment. They're vocal about being concerned about climate change. They want to see action. But what companies are preying on is that beyond that general sentiment that you don't have a lot of information beyond that, right? You want to, say, for example, buy green cleaning products because they're good for the environment. Well, the company is banking that you do want to see something that is green, but that you probably don't really know the difference between what are environmentally safe cleaning chemicals and what aren't, right? And so they get away with technicalities and slapping things on bottles like 100% natural, right? Like there's a lot of natural stuff that isn't good for people or the planet. And so they've taken this language that these generations of concerned climate environmentalists have been developing, and they're using it against us. And you'll just, and even beyond language, right? So there's the slap 100% natural on something, you can say something's earth whatever, and that's just a name. But you could also put a green background and like some trees, right? And then say that this is clean, right? They are also using imagery to convince people, because most of your communication isn't even actually going to be with words, right? It's the images around it. So this is happening. It's happening at scale. And I think that there is no easy way to figure out who's telling the truth and who's not. And I think that that's something we have to come to terms with as people in this era of information, which is there is no one source that you can just trust unequivocally. You do need to take the time to pause and to research and to look into the claims. For a very specific example is Southern Company. Southern Company is a big, power company. It's got several subsidiaries, one of which is Georgia Power. They're really vocal about having made all of these clean energy commitments. I forget the exact nature of their commitments, but they're some type of transition either to net zero or a certain reduction in carbon emissions by a certain time period. So it's like net zero by 2050 or some commitment like that they've made. You want to look that up. So that is a great commitment. But then when you actually dig into it, well, how much of their energy sources are actually coming from renewables? How much are they building? You'll find that they're actually not really doing all this great stuff, and it just takes a little bit of a Google search. Or whatever your preferred search engine is. So I think that I wish I could give you a clean and, watch for these three things, but the big companies are using the same marketing tactics that even good people are using. So they're, you can't just tackle them because of the format, it's really just about taking the time to do the research. Again, you don't have to write a dissertation, just, type it in the search bar, read a couple articles, follow your curiosity, and see where you land.
Yeah, I like that approach. It's just, if you're asking questions, type them into the search bar and see what comes up. It doesn't have to be too complicated. I like that a lot. And I appreciate that you made the point about these companies that are greenwashing. They're using the same tactics as everybody else. There's only like a set number of tools or communications techniques available. Are there any companies or brands or organizations that you think are doing a good job that maybe people could look to as examples of transparency, full communication, documentation, things like that?
Yeah, maybe it's because I'm hungry right now, but Chipotle really comes to mind. I have seen a couple of Chipotle ads that are just like, made me just completely stop in my tracks, right? And what they're really emphasizing in their communications is the emphasis of the journey that food goes through before it goes into your mouth, right? So they're very much talking about the full life cycle of the food that they are purchasing. And that's really important and central to their brand, right? They're trying to be fresh, healthy. And I think that, that's exciting to see them talking about the supply chain. Most restaurants are going to want to talk to you about their supply chain, right? They don't want to tell you where their food is really coming from, especially not the animal protein, right? The chickens and the beef. And I think that Chipotle is really honest in saying, this is where we want to go. And this is what we're doing well. And you have to do a little bit of reading in the lines, between the lines, but they're also calling out places where they could do better. And they've taken this approach, which is central to how they operate as a company, their core values. And then they've taken that and done a beautiful job telling that story through their ads, and they're not really like, hey, we should be concerned about the life cycle of our food. Like, that's not how the ad comes off. It's something, I forget what the slogan is entirely, but as you can see, it doesn't matter that I remember all the details.
Mhm.
They were telling a very important story about, being connected and food and family and being hands-on and taking care of communities, being regenerative, right? And so I hope that they continue to stay committed to that as a core value and to continue to make improvements to their business where they can to be even more sustainable. Another great example of that is a company. I just have to say this one. Just give me 2 seconds to look it up, but basically they sell cashmere. And I thought that was really interesting. Nadam, Naadam. So they sell cashmere, and they, to me, do a really good job of talking about their supply chain. Cashmere comes from sheep, and they take all that wool and convert it into the cashmere. Very obviously a lot of risk for harmful things happening there to animals, and they're very clear about their supply, and the community they work with, I believe, is in Mongolia, and they're very specific about the community that they're engaging in. And they told that story really well, from their advertisement to their website. I'm that person that's going to click on your about page. Brands, if you don't have an about page that tells me what you're about, you're messing up, because I need to know what you're committed to, what your values are. And fancy marketing language, sometimes, I'm a little bit more sophisticated, so I want to read the story behind the brand. They did a great job, and I bought a sweater that was more than I probably should have paid for a sweater, but when it showed up at my door, it was in sustainable packaging, and it said, after like 10,000 miles through the desert and like 3 broken wheels and like 3 bags of cash to the family and blah, 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 here's your sweater. And I thought, wow, look at this company committing to sustainability, telling that story consistently on the website, on the box and the packaging, and so that's what I think. I think that you can't just, as a company, adopt a green or sustainability mindset about one portion of your business. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be in your values. It needs to be in how you're operating in your supply chain. And then you need to be telling that story. And hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, super helpful. I love the idea that it's not enough just to like put it on the website. It has to be the whole story. You have to almost volunteer information that your customers might not even want to know. Like, you want to give all the extra details about the supply chain every step of the way, because it's going to pay off in the long run. It's really
think about the learning journey I went on, right? Like, I had never really been, it's not like I've just been buying cashmere sweaters my whole life. big, fan of your typical cotton blend, right? And so that when I was learning about their company, I mean, they educated me. I felt smarter, and that's a valuable exchange. People, as I said, aren't experts, and that's okay. So then be that learning resource, and then be honest. Like, this is what we figured out, and this is what we haven't. And this is what we're trying to do. And I've seen many other companies do that really well. Who Gives a Crap, toilet paper, and like Bite toothpaste also stand out as great companies.
I love them. Well, I mean, that brings up a good point, is that there's so many products and so many parts of kind of like a sustainability journey that we don't even think about. But then once we do start thinking about it, I know I, for one, have felt overwhelmed sometimes at like all the different actions and things I need to be considering and things that I'm not an expert in. And it's a lot, especially around Earth Day, because that's when all that messaging kind of seems to come out. As someone working in this environmental field, have you experienced any kind of, climate exhaustion, climate burnout, or just feelings of being overwhelmed by our planet and greenwashing and all these things we've just discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something cute and clever, but I'll just say yes. I've definitely experienced feeling overwhelmed. It's a big topic. We're not going to be able to get around that, right? What we're trying to do is build a more sustainable and just way of living on this planet so that we can all thrive as people, but also the planet can thrive, right? We can all thrive together. We want to be regenerative and not extractive, right? That's this mindset of abundance, of like the abundant future that we could have, is like really exciting to me. But then it really brings in the contrast of all the things that we are not doing, the things that are keeping us from getting to that future. And so that's my thing, is if you're overwhelmed by the environmental problem, like you should be. It's a big topic. It's everything about being human that we know. And so I think that said, you can't solve the world's problems, right? You can't carry the world on your shoulders, right? All of those phrases. So I think it's just about doing your best, whatever your best may be in that moment. There are some times where I'm like, I'm going to recycle every little thing. I'm going to compost. I'm going to take things to the hard to recycle materials center. Like, there are days where like, I just want to do all of that. And then I go through busy periods at work, usually during legislative and political seasons. And I just don't have time to like be thoughtful about some of the things that I'm doing, So if it isn't convenient, it's convenient for me to recycle. It's convenient for me to compost. I'm fortunate that I have a composting bin and chickens to eat the compost. But it's not convenient for me to take hard to recycle materials across town to the hard to recycle material facility, right? So I let that go during those time periods. Am I like, oh, I'm so upset that this thing that could be recycled that went into the trash can? Yeah, things have been going in the trash can, forever, right? That shouldn't be. And that's why we're in this problem. I'm one person, I cannot solve this on my own. You have to cut yourself some slack. So, and then if you like, it's one of those things where if you know better, do better, that it's a learning journey. I didn't think about my toothpaste for years until I thought about it. One day I was just like, man, we have like 3 tubes here, and like, what's up with all this waste, and where does this go? And it's just going in the trash can and blah. So I look up alternative toothpaste and found a really great alternative, right? Now I know that's the toothpaste I buy, right? Should I chastise my younger self for not knowing that there was a more sustainable toothpaste brand out there? No, but I know now. Life is cumulative, right? It's cumulative. Your impact will grow over time, and things will become easier over time the more familiar you are with them. The first time you try to think about like eco-friendly fashion, there's a slow fashion. I was like, there's a word for this, slow fashion. It's hard. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I find people who are really like about this, and then you do that research, and the next time you're like, oh, I have this list of like 6 companies that I already know fit my values around purchasing. So, take on what you can when you can. Let go of the stuff that's too hard when you don't have the capacity or energy to do it, and just show up consistently.
That's great advice. And it kind of ties back to what we were saying about social media earlier and the norms that are perpetuated there. I mean, we see eco influencers and they have like all the prettiest mason jars and like everything is so curated, but I like your approach too. It's not realistic. You've got to meet yourself where you're at, cut yourself slack where you can and just do your best. But you also raised a great point too about, it's not always convenient for everybody to be eco-friendly. It is a privilege in a lot of cases to be able to adopt certain eco-friendly choices. And pollution, we all know it disproportionately affects people of color. So what can we as marketers and really everyone do to make sure that those most affected by environmental problems, those most in need of environmental justice, what can we do to make sure that they're included in the conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have lots of different answers for lots of different people, but thinking about marketers in particular, what stands out to me is that we're having a hard time, messaging around climate and environment, not because people don't think it's important. I want to be clear that the numbers show that the overwhelming majority of the American people believe that climate change is happening, and they want to see us do something about it. And they specifically want to see us invest in clean energy. Clean energy is really popular across, if you want to say politically, both sides of the aisle. It's really popular across racial groups. And so, the data shows us that the majority of people care about this. So then theoretically, every environmental, movement should be, overflowing with people who want to get involved. Well, that's not happening. It's not happening for a couple of reasons. I'll start with the first big major reason that, I just to this day am so upset about. Polar bears, right? This is not about polar bears. It's not about polar bears. It's about us. It's about people. It's about me. It's about you, right? This is what we have to do as marketers. We have to find a way to concisely communicate to people the climate crisis is happening now and it is impacting you or the people that you love. That is where the environmental movement lost momentum for decades, right? There were all of these passionate scientists who were, studying, like I said, polar bears in Alaska or some obscure species in some, other, like they're looking at plants and their animals and are like, look, this is indicative that the climate's changing and we need to protect this biodiversity and it's important. Biodiversity is super, super important. Protecting our biodiversity is one of the most important climate imperatives that we have, but it's not compelling to me. If I live in Georgia, I'm unlikely to see a polar bear in my lifetime. I can call that now. I'm not seeing one yet. I'm not going to say never, but I'm unlikely to see a polar bear. So for a really long time, that was the environmental community's sort of like go-to, and it just wasn't relatable. It didn't seem urgent, Ironically, Coke, who is one of the biggest polluters, co-opted the polar bear and made it their mascot. And they're one of the biggest polluters in terms of plastics. And also one of the most resistant companies to plastic legislation, but we'll talk about that later. The point is you have to make it relatable. You have to make it about people. You have to personify it, and you have to be mindful about the way in which the words that you want to use might have been co-opted for something else. And I think that's super, super important in this space. Like they might not mean to you what they mean to the public. So doing the work to be intentional about reaching out with messages that make the climate crisis relatable. And to that point, you're going to need to know then who you're talking to and how the climate movement is impacting them. That is really important because people on the coast are going to be concerned about flooding, right? They're going to be concerned about offshore drilling. That's the type of thing that they're going to be concerned about. People in the city believe it or not, are actually concerned about flooding, right? They're concerned about flooding for a different reason, but they have the same concern. They're worried about the heat, the droughts, heat island effect is big in cities, right? So knowing your audience and making it relatable and understanding, to that point about relatable, like what is the person you're talking to going through is super important. And I've said all that without saying anything about race, right? Because that's what a good marketer is supposed to do. And I think that too often we sort of lump people in and just paint a broad stroke about what we think these people believe. So take the time, segment your groups, figure out, what's going to resonate with people based on, either their unique geography or their racial demographic, and then use those messages.
Yeah, figuring out your target audience is huge. And that's great advice. Last question, I feel like we can leave us with a little bit of hope this Earth Day. What do you hope, anticipate, wish Earth Day would look like in 10 years, a decade from now? What are you thinking?
Yeah, 10 years from now, it's supposed to be 2032. And, that's about around the time where we're supposed to have done a lot if we're going to be able to reasonably mitigate climate change. That's a lot to happen in a decade, and I admit it's daunting. But I guess what I'll say is, like, once we're over the hill, right? The civil rights movement was like this really long thing, right? That came to a peak, went down, peaked down, peaks and valleys and campaigns. But then eventually, something happened. Like we moved enough people. I believe the percentage is 3.5% of the population. We moved enough people that the things that the civil rights activist community were asking for were things that the entire population agreed with and wanted and didn't understand why we couldn't have, and pushed for it, right? That is, I think, where we are getting to with environment, hopefully, as we're at a place where we've motivated enough people that there is nonstop pressure to just get this problem solved from everyone. And so I'm hoping that 10 years from now, we have politicians scrambling to brag about all of the carbon emissions that they've helped shepherd. I want corporations showing their balance sheets of, no, look, we can actually measure what we did. And, that's what I want. I want people arguing about how great they are and how great they will continue to be, and not arguing about whether or not this is something that we have a role to play in and how fast should it happen.
Yeah, it'll take convincing a lot of people, so we'll get to work. But I love it. That's very inspiring, and I'm totally right there with you. And I think maybe in a decade we can touch base and see how we did. Sure, we'll do great. But Brionté McCorkle, we are so grateful that you would speak to us today, kind of in celebration of Earth Day, talking about where we need to go. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your Earth Day, Earth Week, and Earth Day every day.
Thank you. Y'all have a great day.